glyphosate, carcinogens, and the banning of Roundup, pest control is one of the 6 worst jobs in the U.S., and illegal pesticide application is on the rise. All this on this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek Podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek Podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Happy Monday to you all. Hope you guys had an awesome week. I am back here today discussing all things pest. I'm Frank Hernandez, your host. Thank you so much for being here and tuning in to the Pest Geek Podcast. We're going to be discussing a bunch of things that are very controversial on this podcast today. But before I do that, I want to give a couple of shout outs and thank yous to some people who have been following us and listening to the podcast. And on Twitter, we have Backbite Boulder. At Backbite Boulder in Boulder, Colorado, an eco-friendly, affordable bedrug removal, utilizing heat through steam for Boulder County and beyond. So in Boulder, Colorado. Hey, thank you so much for following us on Twitter. We greatly appreciate that. And also, Jeffrey Earl from Floresville, Texas, is following us on Facebook, and we thank you for doing that and following us and giving us likes and everything that you do for us on that podcast. We greatly appreciate that. I wanted to share with you the tech tip. A couple of weeks ago, I think I spoke about the headlamp that I was using, and that one went out on me. It was old already; it was about a year old, and one of the major problems that headlamp has is that it has a little cable that goes from the battery pack across the top of your head with a band and then into the headlamp. And the little cable, it's a very fine cable. It gets damaged. And of course, we're in the attics and, we're banging our head and underneath cabinets and things like that. And it's sensitive. And it went out, but it lasted about a year. And I went to go replace it, and I found a brand new one called the FL60 headlamp. And it goes from the one I had, which was 165 lumens, 175 lumen, all the way to 300 lumen. It's a great headlamp. The advantage to this one is that it's all enclosed in one unit. So there's no longer that battery pack in the back of the head. One unit in the front, no cable. It's a little bit easier unit. Doesn't have the overhead head strap, and it does about almost double the lumens that I had before. So check it out. They're $29.97. You can pick it up at Home Depot. It's the FL60 headlamp. It has a wide angle flood beam also, and it has 2 selections with high and lower beams. Awesome piece of equipment. If you're doing SEO and you're checking out to see what kind of links you have or links your competition may have that you're trying to rank for, and other information about that site, how that site ranks, whether it, what the spam rating of that site is, and to see how it's favored, there's a great tool. It's a free tool right now. It's by Moz, M-O-Z. It's called Open Site Explorer. And if you go to Moz, we have a link here to Moz.com research tools. You will be able to use it. It's a free tool. You just put in the URL, and if you sign in, you can get a lot more data if you register with them than you can get with not being registered. So it's you can get all that. It's really instant. You can see all the backlinks, where they're coming from, and it kind of lets you say, hey, if they're getting good ratings and a good ranking from these types of backlinks, maybe I should try to get these backlinks too, from wherever they're getting them. And it's just a great tool that you can use for free to get better ranking. In the book of the week, I want to talk about a great book. It's called Talent is Overrated. What Really Separates World-Class Performers from Everybody Else by Jeff Colvin. I read this book. I listened to it. It's a phenomenal book because I kind of, you think these great athletes and great performers and musicians and these people have this just enormous amount of talent that makes them what they are. And the reality is quite something different. It has to do with the endless amount of hours these guys dedicate to practicing and improving their craft. And it's no different in the business world, and in our business, especially in pest control, is what's going to differentiate you as a technician and you as a professional from everybody else in your company or everybody else in your industry around you. And it's the time that you put into training, learning, and putting out, just dedicating yourself to being the best that you can be. And this is a great book. It gives you a lot of information of what it takes. And I just thought it was a phenomenal book. And this is things that I've practiced in my life, when I was in corporate America, and what made me better than the other guys that were there. It wasn't because I was really talented. I'm not. This book, it reflects with me and resonates with me because I don't particularly see myself as very talented, a very bright or, highly educated. I definitely just devote myself to whatever it is to know more about my business than anyone else, to know more about my job than anyone else, and putting in the time in studying and training and experimenting and trial is what's going to make you great. And I think you should get that book. You can use if you want to get a free book, you can get it free, the audio book, by using our audibletrial.com/pestgeek link. We'll have that up on the show notes, and you can get that book for free. But I think it's a well worth, I've already listened to it twice, and I think it's just an awesome, awesome book. In the pest alerts, we continue to have problems in Texas with Mexican fruit fly. Right now, there's 5 quarantine areas and counties in Texas. Seems to be mostly the southern part of Texas, right near the border with Mexico, in places like Cameron County and Rio Hondo, Zapata County. We've got links to what's going on in that with the Mexican fruit fly. If you're in Texas, seems to be a big, big problem right now. So check out that link. There's a map of where it is and the quarantine area. If you're involved in any type of, growing or managing or helping with fruit, there's a fruit fly, quarantine area. And now it's total up to, since 5/3, we now have a total of 5. So check that out. In the news, we've got some bad news for the pest control industry. We were rated the pest control as one of the 10 worst jobs in the country. And this is the 28th annual Career Cast annual careers report. And pest control is right up there with one of the top 10 worst jobs to have in the country. The number one being a newspaper reporter. And that is the number one worst job to have. Number 2 came in as logger. Number 3 came in as broadcaster. Number 4, disc jockey. Number 5, enlisted military personnel. Number 6, pest control worker. And number 7, retail person. Number 8, advertising salesperson. 9 as a taxi driver. And number 10 is a firefighter. And the way that they come up with this list. I've got the list there of a link, and also the link to the number 181 to 200, which is the worst 200 jobs, and it goes from the best to the worst in ranking. A lot of the factors that determine this is the potential growth of the market, income, hours worked, emotional and physical work that has to be done to make this job happen, and obviously growth potential and the amount of unemployment. So there's a total of 11 stress factors that determine which professions are the most or least desirable. In issue of, I think what makes it is, it's a tough job. 96% of people have a phobia against pests, so nobody really wants to do this kind of job. Number 2 is the growth of the market. It's been downgraded, and there's a negative 2% growth in this market. Projected between now and I think 2020. So there are a couple of things, but check out the link. It's pretty cool. I don't think it has anything to do whether we're capable. I mean, I don't know anybody that really loves this business. I was just helping out a brother on. He got into the business. He was unemployed, and he got in, and he caught the bug about pest control. And those that stay in and get in catch that bug and to say, man, this is the greatest business in the world. But most people, I think from an outside view, it's not something that's very desirable. I mean, nobody grows up saying, gee, when I grow up, I want to be a pest control guy, unless you grew up in the industry. And so check out the list. Nothing to be really proud about, but, it is what it is. There's a lot of chatter on the issue with Roundup and carcinogenicity of glyphosate, and has triggered pretty much an outcry around the world, and bans are all over the place right now. And you might be saying, why are we talking about glyphosate and Roundup on this podcast? Because this is primarily a pest control podcast. And that is the biggest problem there is with glyphosate. That most people who apply glyphosate or Roundup or this type of herbicide, a non-selective herbicide, don't see it as a pesticide. Yet, since the official registration date of February 16, 1994, it has become the world's most applied pesticide in agriculture. Not only that, but it is the most widely applied pesticide of residential and commercial properties, landscapes, and nurseries. And most people do not consider glyphosate a pesticide. When I do the BMP, which I do about every 2 months, I do a best management practice training portion, and I do the insecticide portion. I inevitably ask the class, this is a class comprised of landscapers, pest control people, city and municipality employees, people who work for large landscape companies, and people who work for, independent landscapes. And it's a class mixed with all kinds of people. So we get a lot of feedback on what's going on in that class. But this is a mandated class for those who want to do fertilizing in the state of Florida. You now have to be certified, licensed, and insured to do fertilizing. So it isn't you just decide you're a landscaper, you want to do, no, now you got to be licensed and certified. And there is a portion of it, which is the pest control portion. And you say, why are you teaching pest control to people who do not do pest control, not licensed to do pest control? And that is the problem, that they are applying all these chemicals to landscapes, not realizing that in the state of Florida, to apply a pesticide to anything other than your personal property where you actually live, and that's the line. People say, well, I own a building and I want to do my own pest control. And in the state of Florida, it is illegal to do pest control without having a license. There is a license available for everyone. There's a license for private applicators, public applicators, commercial applicators, government, city, people who own cemeteries and things like that. You need to be licensed and registered with the state if you're going to apply a pesticide other than to your own personal property. And personal property is your own residence where you live, not a residence that you own and you rent out, or a building that you own, and that is not personal property, even though you own it. And that is the biggest problem that we're having, and they're having in the state of Florida and around the country and around the world, and why these bans are taking place. On March 17 of 2015, experts from 11 countries met at the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC. This is in Lyons, France, and to assess the carcinogenity of 5 organophosphate pesticides: tetrachlorovinphos, pyrithion, malathion, diazinon, and glyphosate. And what they came up with is the evidence in human cancer sites is limited to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and also in animal, it was sufficient for them to classify it as a possible carcinogen. There's been a lot of the problem that we have with a product like glyphosate is the fact that it's such a recently used product since 1994. And we're in 2016, so we're talking about potentially a 22-year-old product that hit the market. And what happens is with a lot of carcinogen studies, and these are long-term studies, 20, 30 years. So we're getting into that period of glyphosate where people are starting to take this seriously and starting to do research now. And what we find with a lot of the other older products is, these products were made back in the 40s and 50s, and it took until the early 90s and 80s to start classifying them as carcinogens. And we have such short-term memories and we live in such short-term environments that we forget that, products like DDT, it took 20 years to classify that. Most of the cases for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma has been in agricultural workers where these products are mostly applied. Remember, we as pest control people apply less than 1% of the pesticide applied in the country. The majority is agriculture. You got nurseries, golf, and then you have the commercial and residential application of pesticides, where most of the pesticides applied are applied by homeowners themselves, 80%. We do 20% of the pest control business. 80% of people do not ever hire a pest control. They do it themselves. And since these studies are mostly focused on agriculture, so the evidence is starting to come on now. Of course, the manufacturers will deny that their products are causing any of these problems. That's just the nature of, multinational companies who make these products are not going to sit out and admit, oh yeah, our products cause cancer, or our products cause this, or our products cause that. And the reasoning is that most of the time when we go to CEU training courses, which most of us all have to take at one point or another, the focus is always on acute toxicity. Why? Most of these courses and most of these classes are presented by manufacturers and distributors and suppliers. They're usually done at a very low cost and it's cheap. And they present the information they have. And some of it is bias. That's the reality. I mean, it is what it is. It's neither a criticism, it's an observation. And you're always taught just on acute toxicity. That's it. Every time it's acute toxicity. And what is acute toxicity? Well, acute toxicity is that toxicity that happens 24, 48 hours after an exposure to a pesticide, or when the guy just falls to the ground right there and passes out because, somebody used a ULV without a respirator and they inhaled it and just, started having a coughing attack and passed out, which is very rare. I mean, when was the last time you heard of an acute toxicity other than when accidentally opened by a child and drank? Where the kid drinks the bottle down, which, it's kind of hard because that stuff doesn't taste very well. So acute toxicity and chronic toxicity in GHP is so darn rare that you have a better chance of figuring out the winning numbers to the Powerball. But yet that's the only thing ever taught. Nobody ever really discusses long-term exposure and the consequences of active ingredients in long-term exposure studies, because most of these studies, as we're going to study, are done over 20, 30 years of studying, looking at farm workers. The problem is with here in this country and around the world that most of those problems never get reported. Why? Most of them are done by immigrants or basically uneducated people who can't read, write, and they're exposed. And, safety in this country is not like around the world, where we have the EPA and OSHA and, anything happens, you can report it. And, OSHA will be right there, up somebody's tailpipe inspecting. Well, what happens in a lot of third world countries, Central and South America, you don't have those rights. So none of this stuff gets really reported often. unless an organization, a world organization comes in and starts finding these and investigating and getting reported. And then it takes decades for them to compile data. So they basically came out and said, yep, there's sufficient evidence that and I've got a lot of links to a lot of studies. Most of the cases in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma are in agricultural workers. And there's a link to that. And then officially on March 20th of 2015, they came out with the monographs, volume 112, the evaluation of 5-organophosphates, insecticides, and herbicides was published. And I got a link to that. In the paper that describes the results from I got another study here that says in the papers described from the results of nearly 3 decades worth of epidemiologic research on the relationship between non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, NHL, and occupational exposure to agricultural pesticide active ingredients and chemical groups. Despite compelling evidence that non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is associated with certain chemicals, this review indicates the need to investigate a larger variety of pesticides in more geographic areas, especially in low and middle income countries, which despite producing a large portion of the world's agriculture, were missing in the literature that were derived. See the problem? Agricultural exposure. Another study in agricultural exposure to carbamate pesticides and risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Recent epidemiological studies have suggested an increased risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from carbamate insecticides such as 7 use among farmers. Okay. So, 7 carbamate product is not a new product. That's almost a 50-year-old product. We're starting to find out. What happened in the past is all these epidemiological studies were in books. Only people who were in that field knew about it, had access to it, and read that kind of documentation. Today, all these are published on the web. And we have more information available to us than we can possibly consume or get into. And most people reading this type of documentation is about as exciting as watching paint dry and water boil. Just not there. So we live in a headline society. We live in a society that if, the first 3 pages of Google, that's what you read. You don't go any further. You don't go down into the 15th page to see what's there. You don't particularly look for these long, 100, 200, 300 page studies. We want it short and sweet. And so in the age of information, ignorance still abounds. And my point is that you can't take in this industry what somebody tells you. Oh, the product is totally safe. Because there's no long-term studies on exposure and what that is to pest control people on a specific active ingredient. And my goal is for you to decide if you want to carry, transport, mix, and apply certain types of chemical in your business. And as a technician, do you want to be exposed to them? If you decide you do and you don't care, that's on you. But not because the information isn't there. And to bury your head in the sand like an ostrich and say, products are totally safe if applied according to the EPA, because the EPA only reviews chemicals about every 15 years. So it'll pass 15 years before the EPA will review them again for safety, for water, for environment, for bees, for fish. You see, it isn't like they're evaluating this stuff continuously. All these studies then are published, and of course they're disputed by the manufacturers. Well, the same manufacturers that dispute glyphosate also will dispute, DDT and Agent Orange and a couple of others. They say, well, they're totally safe, until finally, the proverbial crap hit the fan. And now, all those products are banned. So what's going on? Well, glyphosate, there's a study in glyphosate, hot water, and nephrotoxic metals. And there's an epidemiological study in Sri Lanka where they're looking at it, and basically it's causing in the water supply, it's at excess levels, Because, of course, these companies don't have, the safeguards we have in this country and the things that we say you shouldn't do, all these other countries will ignore, allow it to get into their groundwater, and then people are drinking it, and they're having all kinds of kidney diseases and kidney failure. And there's a study on that. States like California are leading the way in requiring disclosure of chemical active ingredients that have been possible carcinogens, possible causing birth defects and reproductive harm. And I think that is smart, that in the age of information, you get to decide what you're going to have in your home, what you're going to apply to your property, or what you and your business are going to apply, and having the information for you to make a decision. It's not about this broad attitude about banning everything, or taking and say, well, if it isn't natural, you should ban it. I think that's the wrong approach. I think it has to do with training and education. Proposition 65 in California does that. A lot of people who don't want this information getting out to people will totally just, it's wrong, you shouldn't do it, and nobody should know. Because for years, for decades, pest control people were told the product is safe. What did they tell their customers? Product is safe. Then 30 years later, 30 studies come out and say, they're not safe. So do you trust the pest control guy or not? I mean, obviously, when people look at pest control people, I see probably new clients, maybe 3, 4, 5 properties a day. Inevitably, the customer doesn't think that I will be able to control their problem. They think that because we are the company that we are, what we're offering, there's no possible way we control it. Why? Because they've already tried everything. I go in and I find the roach tablets all over the place where kids can get them. There's roach powder, boric acid, or whatever DE. I mean, I've even found in homes acephate, that ortho fire ant killer. I think it's acephate 75 or 95. I can't forget which one of the two. And they've poured that all over the kitchen floor, where somebody can just, little kid crawl, and there are little kids in the house, and they can crawl on it, stick it in their mouth, or inhale it, and just the dust all over the place like it was nothing, all over the plates and inside the cabinets and everywhere. They've thrown acephate dust. Talk about being negligent. If we did that, we would get hung. And they've done the fogger, and they've done the spraying. And by the time they're done, they've added 15 chemicals to their house, pesticide. They've contaminated everything. And then they're saying, well, is your product safe to you? Because they think that what we have and what they can buy over the counter, what they buy over the counter is completely non-toxic. What we use, highly toxic. That's the mentality. That nothing is going to go wrong with what they do because those products obviously don't work. And what they're thinking of, I've tried everything. I don't know what you're going to do to control it because I've tried everything. Like, they forget that, I only spend about maybe 8 to 20 hours a week reading entomological material, doing testing, trial, error. And the fact that we have entomological knowledge they don't have, biological knowledge about that pest that they don't have, because they only consider the chemical first. Never the insect biology. And they're asking if, I said, you've contaminated your house more than I ever will in 20 years of doing your pest control service. You've done that in 6 weeks, 6 months. That's the danger, that these products are available to people who have no training, no certification, no understanding, no license, no understanding of PPE, no understanding of label rates, no understanding of active ingredients, no understanding of wind drift, no understanding of absorption, no understanding of toxicity, no understanding of the laws that apply, whether federal, local, or municipal, no understanding of leaching, no understanding of runoff. And they think that somehow all we are is a chemical applicator. Glyphosate is being very seriously looked at in the UK, in Europe, and in US, and a lot of cities are banning it, including, we have one city right now, Miami Beach, thinking of banning glyphosate. What the part that everybody's ignoring since they can't control who buys it and who applies it, they have to put a general ban on it in order to stop from being used, because they can't stop it from saying, well, landscapers, here's the biggest user in residential properties, commercial properties of glyphosate, Roundup, is landscapers. And of course, the professional landscape associations are dealing mostly with large professional companies, but forgetting that the majority of people doing landscape and landscape work are either non-trained, non-licensed people who do not consider glyphosate to be a pesticide, yet under Florida law, Chapter 482 and the EPA and every other regulatory agency, it's a pesticide. And if you need a pesticide license to apply a pesticide and you are applying a pesticide to a property, you're in the illegal pest control business and you don't know it. And you have none of the training, none of the certificate. You have no clue what it is that you're doing. You're just putting a product that you feel you should be able to apply because it doesn't have an odor. You don't see the potential hazard of it. And they sell it over the counter everywhere and anybody can buy it. And therefore it's okay for you to apply it. And commercial properties, they're applying even insecticides. They're applying insecticides because they don't see the illegality of it. They don't see the potential problem of them applying a pesticide. Homeowners, every single homeowner that I know applies Roundup. I find the tank in their garage to their property. Landscapers, that there are laws and regulation about how much miles per hour you can do a spraying, how close you can get to a body of water, that you shouldn't apply it to hard surfaces because it'll run off into storm drains. Most of the problem that I have down here in South Florida, and you're going to probably find it across Texas and across California, all the way across, is that the majority of people that are down here doing landscaping are Hispanic people who cannot read a label. So how do they know where and how to apply a product? That's a huge concern of mine, because I've seen them apply not only Roundup, but also insecticides, herbicides to the lawn and burn lawns. Every damage that I find on the landscape when I go do my lawns, when I go treat yards, every piece of damage that I find, it's usually linked back to a malpractice that a landscaper did, whether it's an improper pruning, an improper trimming, an improper mowing, burning of the lawn because they over applied the Roundup, damage to shrubs because of wind drift that damaged the shrub when they applied it. And nobody's looking at this. Nobody's looking about the amount that all of these pesticides are not being applied by professional licensed trained applicators. They're being applied by people who are being asked to do it by homeowners and property, or they feel they can make money at it, and they do it and they see nothing wrong with it. That's my concern. Not the fact, because what they're doing is they're handling all this product in their trucks with no safe storage. They're in the back of the truck, and in an accident, that bottle's going to go flying and land on somebody and spill all over the place. That they're not using any PPE, no personal protection equipment, no gloves, no long sleeves. And they're handling the product like if it was water. And then they're wondering why 20 years later they've got cancer. They're breathing it because they're spraying it and it's going up into the air and they're breathing it in, not realizing how dangerous that is. That's the real concern that I have about products like glyphosate, because there's not a whole lot of pest control people that are applying it. I mean, I know a couple that say, hey, I do it as an add-on service. I show up to the property and I'm doing their pest control, and the landscaper hasn't treated the pavers, and I'll treat all the pavers for them. But you're a licensed professional. You know what you're doing. And it's very far and few between of people who are actually applying this product. Yet, since it's classified as a pesticide, the pest control industry is responsible. I've done a couple of podcasts on this where I've mentioned this. You know, one of them is Yo and Ate Us, understanding the who's applying pesticides in the world, and it isn't the pest control industry. And the associations are saying, hey, we're already losing a lot of products. We don't want to lose glyphosate as a potential product because we don't have that many, non-selective herbicides that you can apply to a landscape. There is no rotation, by the way, of these products. I mean, it's glyphosate. Well, all they do is switch the brand. When one supplier doesn't have one brand, they'll have another brand, but you're still using the same product, and you're wondering if you're going to get resistance to it. That's another major concern. But in a how toxic is it in higher amounts to fish if it starts to leach into groundwater in higher dosages? Because the dosages that are being measured are low dosages, and they're saying it's totally safe at these dosages to certain, it doesn't really much aggravate bees and things like that, which is not a real huge concern, by the way. So that's my issue. That's my cry to the industry to step out, talk about these issues. I mean, we've got resistance down here where we tried to talk to city governments about these issues, and people who are in the industry, arborists, and the local city government is not going to vote itself out of a job when 50% of the people who work here are Hispanic, and a great majority are landscapers, and they don't want to put any additional burdens on, like training and think about this. You can go out and buy a chainsaw that can cut down a tree, not wear any protection for your legs or your thighs, go out and pick up somebody to help you, hand them a chainsaw with no training, no certification, and if the guy accidentally uses that chainsaw, can kill himself or somebody else, and there's absolutely no requirement for that. That's where it's almost like the Wild Wild West in this environment. And you see it all the time. I mean, I got picture after picture after picture of damaged landscapes. 90% of that damage was caused by the landscaper not knowing how to prune a tree, how to trim a bush, how to apply a pesticide, applying the wrong pesticide, the wrong insecticide, he's treating a fungus with an insecticide and treating an insect with a fungicide because he doesn't understand the difference of what it looks like on a plant. It's a very serious problem. Something that really needs to get looked at. I hope that this lands on the right ears, that separates us, the professionals that pay for the training, pay for the licensing, pay for the certification, pay for the insurance, to stand up and say, no, I don't want to be lumped together with those people who do not, and are not required to, and be blamed for what's something that we're not doing. And make the same requirements that if you are a landscaper in any state, you're going to use a chemical, you have to be trained and licensed, whether you're going to use it or not, because you know that you're going to use it. You know you're going to fertilize. You know you're going to use an herbicide, and require that every person who wants to be a landscaper and have a landscape license be certified for pesticides and fertilizers, period. I know the industry is going to go in an uproar with this, but you can't deny it, that is going on, and that the problem is real. And that's pretty much my rant on this podcast for today. Folks, I hope you have a great one. Enjoy yourselves. Be safe. Get educated. Get trained. Be the best that you can be. I'll see you next week.